Memento Mori. Remember that you will die. This simple yet daunting phrase dates all the way back to the days of ancient Rome. Here it was used by those who were in power to remember that they too will one day die. Memento Mori acted to humble the elite and remind them to conduct themselves with honor and respect. This phrase would go on to be adopted by Stoic philosophers such as Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. But it should be known, Rome is not the only place in the world to hold reverence towards death. Memento Mori can be seen being observed across the globe historically, ranging from Christian beliefs, ancient Egyptian society, as well as found in Buddhist teachings. The name may change, but the message remains the same. We all die. Death is something that every living being will experience. What remains important is not that we die, but rather how we should live. And Memento Mori serves to remind us of that. How does one conduct themselves knowing that they will one day disappear? How do you find the will to live, despite knowing that one day you too will breathe your last? Releasing in 2006, Persona 3 acts as the third entry, technically fourth, of the Persona series. It was released 6 years after the last release in the franchise, 2000's Eternal Punishment. Revamping nearly every aspect of the game, Persona 3 did away with the more traditional RPG formula in favor of the newly introduced calendar system, allowing players to live day to day, choosing their actions manually. In addition to this, Persona 3 also introduced the social link system, which gives players the chance to bond with various characters in the game. These range from the core cast to students you go to school with to complete strangers. Other minor changes include the battle system basing itself around the one more mechanic and the method that personas are obtained. Some of these changes can be chalked up to the transition to more powerful hardware, going from the original PlayStation to the PlayStation 2. However, some of them seem to have been created with the specific intent of tying the whole experience around the game's central theme. This theme being death, the confrontation of it, the acceptance of it, and so on. Aspects such as the social link and calendar system go much deeper than they seem with this in mind, and it is easy to take them for granted, seeing as they have become the norm for the Persona series. We'll get deeper into these in a bit, but for now, I'd like to touch back on the theme of this game. Persona 3 is a story about death. Death surrounds every element of this game, from the previously mentioned gameplay mechanics to its aesthetics, its story, and its characters. Death is inescapable, and Persona 3 truly captures that. Telling the story of Makoto Yuki as he is forced to come face to face with death itself. During this journey, he comes into contact with a number of people who have been directly affected by death as well, learning to live for themselves and what they believe in, accepting the past for what it is, and finding the strength to move forward while holding on to their dreams and ideals. In order to understand how death influences Persona 3, we will first look at the changes to the game first. Then, once we have covered that, we can begin to dissect the story, look at its theme even further, and uncover what I believe to be a profound and touching story of triumphing over one of humanity's universal fears. Beginning with the changes to the game, we'll look at the most apparent new addition, the life simulator aspect, known as the calendar system by fans. Unlike the previous Persona titles, Persona 3 features the chance to experience a full day in the protagonist's shoes, choosing what you do with the day, and manually ending it when you've exhausted your options. At first glance, it's a fun addition that can feel tedious at times. There were certainly points during my time with the game where I felt that I wanted to just skip until the next day so I could be refreshed and ready to take on Tartarus or spend time with one of the many social links. But then, as I neared the end of my time with the game, something clicked. The sometimes mundane, other times engaging method of the calendar system can be read as integral to the theme of death that Persona 3 has. By adding the ability to choose how you spend your time, it not only draws you closer to the protagonist and his experiences, but also lines up with the greater narrative. Some days are fun, some are boring. Much like real life, even when you go through terrible experiences, you have to make the decision to get out of bed and live life. The only time the game automatically skips days are during exams, which makes sense as far as gameplay goes. Thus, during certain plot points where players may feel just as defeated as Makoto, such as after Ryoji shares the truth of their situation, it can be hard to find the will to do anything. During each day, you are given the chance to spend time with social links, travel to various locations to play games or study, or just go home and prepare yourself via Tartarus. And what adds another layer of authenticity to this experience is that not every in-game day is the same. Some characters are only available on specific days. The arcade only allows you to play certain games, and so on, making not only the world feel more real, but the characters who inhabit it as well. The social links play an interesting role in Persona 3, as they exist to not just flesh out the world, but add to the core theme as well. These stories share glimpses into the lives of those around you, with the intent being that with each social link, you're able to gain a piece of whoever you speak with as they gain something from you, leading to them sharing a token of your bond with you, and opening up new personas to fuse. Often during these stories, characters confide in the player about their fears, insecurities, or their past. Within these stories, death appears, and if not death, then something similar. For example, in the social link with Kazushi, he shares his fear of losing the ability to play sports, which is not only his passion in life, but if he is successful, then he plans to pay for his cousin's surgery which would allow him to walk again. While this is not death outright, it bears the same feelings of helplessness that death invokes in some. The inability to help someone, loss of a loved one, lack of agency in one's life. As mentioned previously though, some of these stories do deal with death directly, and these are some of the most poignant social links in the game. And not only do they supplement this theme of death, but they also offer different perspectives on the topic. Akinari's social link is the strongest one in this regard. Diagnosed with an incurable illness, Akinari doesn't have much time left to live. As a result, he has a bleak outlook on life. He initially brushes Makoto off as he figures that the dead are better off left alone and Makoto should spend his time among the living. Though, as the social link advances, the two grow closer. Akinari shares more details about his life, such as the fact that his family distances themselves from him, and how he enjoys reading and writing. Due to his situation in life, he often starts but never ends his stories. Same with his writing. By the end of his social link, he became too ill to continue treatment at the hospital. And what seems like it would be a bleak or dark ending is anything but. Akinari finishes his story and accepts his conditions, lamenting that the meaning of his life shouldn't be up to him, but rather up to those who knew him. By examining various perspectives on not just death, but life in general, Persona 3 offers the player a lot to consider during the runtime of the game. And while Akinari is what I consider to be the best example of this, each social link has something valuable to offer to the player. Except maybe Kenji's. That one was just not good. Sorry, Kenji. In addition to these added elements, the general atmosphere and imagery of the game act as a constant reminder of human mortality. The method of summoning a persona in Persona 3 changed from previous entries. As opposed to a persona simply appearing, they now must be summoned through the use of an evoker, a gun-shaped object the user is meant to point to their head and shoot, creating the visual of someone taking their own life, leading each further entry to change the method of summoning their persona. This works as both a visual and metaphorical message to players about death. In creating the sense of dying, the user is able to draw out their latent abilities. The sensation of shooting oneself is traumatic, but necessary to fight. This is why we see some struggle with it at first. Yukari, who was paralyzed with fear during the first full moon, could not bring herself to do it. Then we have others such as Makoto, who can be assumed to be unafraid of death, having no issues with using the evoker. Using your persona comfortably shows that the user knows that every fight is a risk and that they could die. but their will to fight overrides this. I'll talk a bit more about being able to summon a persona later on when we cover further in the plot. But these aren't the only reminders of the mortal fate we all share. The Dark Hour itself is an extension of this theme of death. Only those who have had an encounter with death in some capacity are able to remain aware during this time. But not only this, those who fall ill to apathy syndrome symbolize those who are unable to accept death, resembling those in real life who become withdrawn and shut away due to fear. Those who remain conscious during this time transform into coffins, which adds to the contrasting nature of those who acknowledge their fate and those who do not. The imagery of the Dark Hour is imposing. The peaceful blue night sky transforms into a haunting shade of green. Any body of water shifts to an uneasy red color reminiscent of blood. The primary source of light during this time is the moon, which glows an ominous and striking yellow. In many shots of the game, it appears much larger and more oppressive than normal, standing firmly at the center of the screen usually. To indicate the coming of the Dark Hour, a large clock fills the screen and ticks to 12. Once again, Persona 3 is rife with symbolism. Often in artwork that is meant to evoke thoughts of death, a clock will appear. Ticking to midnight represents a full cycle of the clock. In other words, a life that has been lived. Continuing from this, the iconic Velvet Room also bears symbolic imagery. In a shift from the Opera House scenery in the first two entries, the Velvet Room now takes on the appearance of an elevator. Throughout the game, this elevator is in constant motion whenever Makoto enters. Elevators also can be interpreted as symbols of death, representing the journey from one point to another. During the final battle with Nyx, once it is revealed that the battle is futile, Makoto and the others lose the ability to move or fight. They begin to sink as they appear weighed down by an invisible force. The saving grace comes when Makoto was able to stand and face Nyx. As he stares down the impossible odds, he is whisked away to the Velvet Room. Once there, the elevator finally reaches its destination as Makoto awakens the Universe Arcana. This arcana allows him to, in Igor's words, defeat the undefeatable. With this, the Velvet Room has finished its climb to the top, and Makoto wields the power to go on to defeat Nyx. His journey is now complete. We'll look at this scene more in depth towards the end of the video, but for now, I wanted to draw attention to the symbolism of the Velvet Room. Now that we've gone over the ways the gameplay mingles with the overarching motive of death, it's time to examine the story of Persona 3 itself. To do this, I've decided to break things up a bit. The game can be divided into 3 different phases: acknowledgement of death, confronting death, and then accepting death. As we get into each section, I will cover the plot as it progresses and analyze how Persona 3 handles this theme. Persona 3 has players come face to face with death within the very first moments of the story. Upon choosing to start a new game, a simple black screen with text appears. This text states, This ambiguous text refers to the reality of Makoto's situation. Death comes for us all, but in order to preserve the future, he will be given 1 year's time to prevent anything that may come. From here, players will be treated to a cutscene that establishes the setting perfectly. Makoto travels to his new home, a dorm he'll be staying in, as the Dark Hour begins. Average civilians are replaced with coffins as the sky turns green. Juxtaposed by this nightmarish setting is Makoto's calm demeanor. Paying no mind to the bizarre world around him, he continues his venture to the dorm. This showcases his lack of fear towards death, as he moves forward in spite of the grim situation, appearing apathetic or neutral towards it all. During this introduction, we are also able to see Yukari struggle with her evoker, crying as she faces down the barrel of a gun, symbolizing her inability to face death. Once he arrives at his final destination, Pharos appears and has Makoto sign a contract. This contract ensures the death of Makoto, but also unlocks the power needed to offset whatever may come. By signing the contract, Makoto is able to enter the Velvet Room, as well as awaken to his persona. Following this, the game begins to open up as the plot continues. During this time, we're introduced to the many characters who will be joining us on our quest to uncover the mystery of the Dark Hour. Some of these characters have had to contend with death prior to the events of the story. They've been forced to acknowledge death and deal with the restricting presence it has, the power it holds over their lives due to the lack of reconciliation. This sets up the motivations for these characters to grow, as well as explaining the way that they behave. None of them have grown the strength to look inward and confront their feelings. Not yet. Yukari lost her father in an accident. This accident taking place during his time as a researcher for the Kirijo group. Mitsuru lost her grandfather during this as well, with him being responsible for the events of the game. His research centered on shadows, which led to the awakening of Nyx, as he believed her arrival to serve as salvation for humanity. This knowledge isn't revealed until much later on, though. These revelations serve as excellent markers for growth. As we see them in the beginning, they both carry the weight of losing a family member on their shoulders and allow this trauma to guide their actions subconsciously. Mitsuru is incredibly self-sacrificing, running herself bare to be both successful in her studies and contribute to ending the Dark Hour. In her subconscious, she feels like she is just as much at fault as her grandfather is. Yukari doesn't learn the circumstances of her father's death until later on in the plot, but during the beginning of the game, it's clear that she is short-sighted and does her best to bottle up her feelings. Instead, these emotions come out as resentment towards Mitsuru for being strong-willed and appearing perfect, or as overprotection towards those that she considers unable to fight back. Moving on, there is the trio of Ken Amada, Shinjiro Aragaki, and Akihiko Sanada. These three have been connected by the thread of death. As children, Shinji and Akihiko were raised together in the same orphanage alongside Akihiko's sister. During one particularly tragic day, the orphanage burned down, causing the death of Akihiko's sister. From that point forward, Akihiko dedicated himself to physical strength. Ignoring the reality that he could not have prevented his sister's death, he blindly believes that if he becomes strong enough, he'll be capable of stopping anything. While he didn't outwardly show it, this loss deeply affected Shinji as well, likely due to seeing how much it had shaken his closest friend. After the disaster at the orphanage, the two remained friends and even went on to be the founding members of SEAS with Mitsuru. However, tragedy struck once more as Shinji's persona went berserk and attacked a civilian. This civilian happened to be Ken's mother, who succumbed to her injuries on that day. There is symbolism within this event, as Shinji could be seen as someone unable to acknowledge death, which led to the loss of control of his persona. Personas in this game are only able to be comfortably used by those who understand that they will one day die. This loss of control sent him spiraling even more, cutting himself off from Akihiko and abandoning his position in SEAS. This event takes such a toll on him that he begins to take illicit drugs in order to keep his persona locked away. Again, due to this refusal to acknowledge death, Shinji turned to something that can be seen as a parallel for real-life drugs. A scenario all too common in the real world, as a large amount of people turn to drugs due to their inability to cope with traumatic events. Common reasons include a difficult home life, grieving a loss, and excessive stress. This analogy is especially strong during the cutscene where Akihiko finds out that Shinji is taking these due to his intense and volatile reaction. The last member of the trio, Ken, who is established to have no father in the picture, enters the story with no mother either. He is all alone in the world at just 10 years old. Unable to focus on living his life, Ken dedicated himself to finding whoever killed his mother. He aims to take revenge and then take his own life, as due to his inability to reflect on death, he believes that this is what his mother would want. During the first act of the game, we see how death influences much of the cast. They know death, but they have not reconciled. They have yet to confront their problems and learn how to accept them. Persona 3 demonstrates the struggle it can be to live with death, looming over the shoulder of these characters, influencing their actions subconsciously. Acting as the unifying force is the player character Makoto. He bands the group together, serving as the leader for SEAS operations. There is another degree of symbolism added when the revelation comes later that from within Makoto, death was sealed. Right from the moment he set foot in the dorm, death began to take its form. The countdown had begun. This is also why the 12 shadows began to appear, leading C's to take action. Death taking the form of life, bringing together those who have been touched by death, an unavoidable chain of events. Makoto begins this journey during the first full moon of the game, in which the Magician Shadow attacks the dorm. With everyone either incapacitated or unable to act, Makoto takes the charge. Picking up the evoker that Yukari was unable to use, he demonstrates his lack of fear. This sees Makoto act as the catalyst in not only bringing C's together, but inspiring the cast to start on the path of change. It is during this initial attack that we see Makoto have his confrontation with death. Confrontation in this sense being conceptually different to acknowledgement, having characters be face to face with either death itself or an extension of it. While fighting the Magician's Shadow, Makoto is unable to stop it. This is when Thanatos emerges, violently ripping itself from his natural persona, Orpheus. Thanatos then easily disposes of the shadow, before once again disappearing. This event can be read as an example of how death can appear at any time. However, now is not Makoto's time to die. He has much more to do before that. Persona 3 is careful with how it handles its cast, giving players plenty of time to bond with the characters and get to know them. As the days go by, though, death begins to draw near once again. We get our first glimpse during the summer trip the gang goes on. During this, Mitsuru reveals the truth of their situation, divulging the information that her grandfather was responsible for releasing the 12 shadows. We're shown the final message left by Yukari's father, how he loves her and needs them to dispose of these shadows. Once again, the wound reopens for her as she is faced with her father's death. She is among the first of the cast that is forced to confront death. No longer can she push the feelings she has away, as the image of her father's final moments are seared into her memory. In spite of this, though, she still has not reached the final step of her journey. The final step that she and the rest of her cast must face: reconciliation and acceptance. Throughout Persona 3, the bulk of the opposition you face take the form of inhuman monsters. But it should be known that these are not the only enemies you will encounter. C's is not the only group who are active during the Dark Hour. Strega is a group of 3 Persona users who are also active during the Dark Hour, taking on requests given to them via the web. These requests include any number of taboo or dark tasks, often seeing Strega outright kill people who users want gone. While they're not involved with C's initially, they eventually make it their goal to stop them as they don't want the Dark Hour to end. Believing that C's are throwing away their gift, the single thing that separates them from average people. Strega views the world as inherently cruel due to their origins. Originally average people themselves, they were taken in by the Kirijo group along with 97 other children. These children were vulnerable due to not just their age, but the fact that they were homeless. In a clear example of the rich taking advantage over the poor, the Kirijo group experimented on these children in order to fend off the shadows. These experiments failed, causing all of the children to die. All but Strega, who would once again be abandoned and left to figure it out themselves, cast aside by life, time and again. Due to their traumatic experiences and unusual source of power, Strega are forced to take pills to suppress their persona. The same pills that Shinji takes. Again, this can be seen as a parallel to real-life trauma and drug use. Strega takes these drugs in order to push away a part of themselves that they can't control and would rather ignore, only using these personas when they must fight C's, torturing themselves to bring them out due to their suppression. Strega views the world through a nihilistic lens, believing that there is no value to life, working off the notion that we all die one day anyways, so it doesn't matter when or how we get there. Due to this, they act as opposition to C's not just in terms of their goals, but also philosophically. As Makoto and the others find value in life throughout the course of the game, Strega stick to these dark beliefs. It is during the summer trip that we're introduced to Aigis, a robot who was created with the sole purpose to kill shadows. She is shown to be immediately attached to Makoto, being strangely drawn to him. This is due to her repressed memory that she sealed Nyx within him, creating a sense of guilt. Aigis is a unique character in the story due to the fact that she is not human. She can be seen as something that lies in between life and death. Aigis is alive by definition, yet unless she is completely destroyed, she cannot die. This dynamic is handled exceptionally, as she feels alienated from the other characters in the game. Progressively, though, she does begin to become more human in a sense, accepting her emotions and growing closer to realizing her purpose in life, learning that she isn't meant to exist just to kill shadows. She doesn't confront death until later on in the story, when Ryoji reveals his true identity. Only then does Aigis realize that while she may not die, others around her will, and she will exist long after they are gone. This realization disturbs her, especially when it comes to Mikoto due to that same guilt as mentioned previously. Briefly after the trip, Koromaru comes into the plot by joining Seas. Koromaru acts as another example that death affects not just humans, but every living being. Koromaru's owner, a monk from a nearby shrine, had passed away 6 months prior to the beginning of the game. Despite this, Koromaru would continue to guard the shrine and wait every day for his master's return. His story is a clear parallel to Hachiko's. Hachiko, for those who don't know, and I'm sure some of you do, is a dog that became quite popular in Japan. Hachiko was an Akita whose owner had passed away while at work. Hachiko would travel to Shibuya Station each day to meet his owner as he got off of work, but one day, he passed away before he was able to return home. Despite this, Hachiko waited there for him, and continued to return there for 9 years until he eventually passed away too. Locals came to feed Hachiko and care for him as he waited, not understanding that his owner had died and would never return to that station. Hachiko achieved somewhat of a celebrity status and is now revered as the most loyal dog of all time. He even has memorials dedicated to him, as well as films, books, and so on. Koromaru's story is similar due to both losing their owner but remaining loyal no matter what. During the dark hour, Koromaru would remain conscious, likely due to this relationship with death, and be attacked by shadows. In a moment of desperation, a miracle occurred and he was able to summon a persona to fight off the threat. Akihiko, who happened to be wandering the streets at that time, came to support him. In his own unique way, Koromaru had confronted death and even accepted his owner's passing, growing a fighting spirit and becoming a valuable member of Seas. The looming hands of death approach once more as we begin to look at the next segment of the story. We see Ken Amada and Shinjiro Aragaki join Seas, one after the other with little time in between. The tragedy that unravels between the two sees Ken and Akihiko both forced to confront death and deal with the complex feelings left in its wake. The motive for the two to join Seas stand in stark contrast to one another. Shinji joined after realizing that Ken had joined, wanting to prevent a child from getting blood on his hands. Meanwhile, Ken joined with the sole purpose of tracking down the man who killed his mother. Slowly, during their time together, Ken begins to put the pieces together behind the death of his mother, realizing that it was Shinji who had killed his mom. Choosing to target Shinji on the same day that his mother was killed, Ken brings him to the alley where she died during a full moon. With the knowledge that the rest of the team is away contending with the Arcana Shadow, Ken aims to commemorate the date of his mother's death by killing Shinji, seeing this as not only an act of revenge, but bringing justice when it wasn't there. It's important to remember that in the eyes of the world, his mother's death was marked off as an accident. This ate away at Ken, who knew that deep down, something was amiss. She had to have been murdered, not simply the victim of a blameless accident. Before Ken could commit to his revenge, Shinji came forward and told him that he accepts this, and that he has lived with this guilt for years now. And now, if Ken kills him, then he too will live with the same guilt. Once you take a human life, you will never get that blood off your hands. Shaken by Shinji's calm demeanor, Ken hesitates and has his moment interrupted by Takaya, the leader of Strega. Takaya shares the truth that Ken was ready to take his own life after killing Shinji, which causes him to snap, stating that he shouldn't just throw his life away, because that wouldn't make his mother happy. Takaya laments, and then goes to shoot Ken, as in his eyes, death is death, and it doesn't matter how or when you die. We all die one day. Shinji leaps in to protect Ken, sacrificing himself. Akihiko and the rest of SEES arrive just as Shinji is shot, leaving them all to witness his final moments.
Give yourself time. Let your anger be your strength. Come on, kid, you're just a kid. You've got your whole life ahead of you, so don't waste it. Make it your own, okay?
But
These final words Shinji left behind capture the themes in Persona 3 perfectly. We are only given one life, so we need to make it matter. There's no purpose in a life lived if you just throw it away. Ken has to live now, knowing that Shinji gave his life for him. His mother's killer wasn't some vile criminal. He was someone who he had gotten to know. A man who was hard on the outside, but kind and scarred on the inside. A man who had a soft side to him, preparing meals for Karamaru in his spare time. And now, he's gone. Shinji marks the first death that players witness, showcasing the dedication Persona 3 has to its theme of death, committing to the finality of it. The game doesn't go back on his sacrifice. Unless you play Persona 3 Portable, but let's ignore that because honestly, that's a really bad decision that kind of directly disproves my point here. But anyways, leaving the characters time to cope with this very real death and its aftermath. Going as far to even show the funeral for Shinji at school. Death is final and imposing. The core cast has been confronted by death yet again, specifically touching on Ken and Akihiko, who this loss affected the most. Ken now living with the complicated feelings surrounding this event. Akihiko having lost yet another person close to him, reminding him of the same powerless feelings he held. This moment acts as the foundation for both of them, leading to character evolution, which I will touch on in the next and final section. As mentioned previously, Strega is a group based on bleak and nihilistic beliefs. Among them is Chidori, a girl with a murky past. We first begin to see her life outside of Strega when Junpei passes her by as she's drawing in public. Interested in her drawing, and her looks, Junpei stops to chat. She ignores him, which leads to him trying to get her attention time and again. The two begin to develop a bond of sorts over time, with Junpei picking up on traits of hers. One of these traits is her tendency to self-harm, leading him to try and rush her to a hospital. Chidori brushes it off, characterizing her attitude towards life and death as indifference. Based on what we can see with Junpei, he is a man who is constantly trying to live a life to its fullest. Seeing someone who treats life as a chore, he does his best to inspire her, attempting to show her that there is more to life than just wasting away. Their relationship would truly flourish during the time that Chidori spends in the hospital. After suffering an injury during one of the showdowns between Strega and SEES, Chidori would be involuntarily committed to the hospital by Mitsuru and the Kirijo group. Junpei would try to see her every chance he could, while Mitsuru and Akihiko only visited her to try and extract information. Junpei's insistence on seeing her so often broke through her hard shell, causing the two to grow even closer. Chidori began to see Junpei as the only positive thing in her life, with everything and everyone else not caring who she was. Likewise, Junpei saw more value in himself as he often suffered confidence issues. We saw these confidence issues on full display, such as during the full moon operation, where they take on the shadow in the train. Junpei often feels like he is lagging behind and not as special as everyone else. In a dramatic sense, these two begin to fill the empty parts that the other is missing. One lacking confidence, and the other not seeing the world in a positive light. Tragically, Chidori is once again returned to her former occupation as Strega breaks into the hospital she was staying at. Takuya forces her to return with them, reminding her of their dark views. Seeing no other choice, Chidori returns and attacks Junpei along with the others. After a brief battle, she relents and gives up, not understanding why Junpei continues to pursue her, explaining how the thing that she fears the most is losing someone important to her. She doesn't fear death, but rather losing those she holds near, which is why she has always shut herself off. In a fit of rage, Takuya shoots Junpei in order to bring Chidori back to his side. In a near-death state, Junpei has a vision of himself in a hospital bed. His roles swapped with Chidori during their time together. She lets him know how much he meant to her, and sacrifices herself for him, using her persona to bring him back to life at the cost of her own. Narratively, both Chidori and Junpei confronted death in this moment. Coming face to face with death, with Junpei experiencing his own death briefly, and Chidori witnessing the death of someone she grew to love. Pushing this connection further, Junpei's persona evolves. Symbolizing his growth at this moment, he bears the weight of death now. The joining of Chidori's soul with his, her sacrifice, gave him newfound power and ambition. Upon defeating the last of the 12 shadows, Makoto and the others notice that the dark hour has yet to disappear. There is a ringing of bells which marks the beginning of the end. This ringing acts as the indicator that Nyx will be coming, the bringer of death. An interesting thing to note is that these bells sound similar to the death knell, the traditional ringing of bells to announce a death. After the ringing of the bell, they are faced with Ikitsuki and Tartarus, who has Aigis at his side. Now, in a zombie-like state, Aigis has lost her will and is filling the role of a servant for Ikitsuki. He reveals to Makoto and the others that they have inadvertently awoken Nyx. The 12 shadows were formerly part of a whole, and by defeating them, they became complete once again. Ikitsuki worked as a researcher on the project Mitsuru's grandfather began, which was not to harness the power of time or anything like they had said. It was to fulfill the prophecy of the fall. He believed that whoever brings about the fall would be marked as the king and rule over the new world. Blinded by his ideals, he believes that by finishing what Kirijo had started, he will be named king. He faces off with Makoto and the others, killing Mitsuru's father and then himself in the process. Ikitsuki would rather throw away his life than change and grow as a person. He was someone who was so single-minded that they could see no other way to live, a selfish individual through and through. Carelessly killing Mitsuru's father, Takeharu, robbing her of the last family member she was close to, and traumatizing the rest of the team, having them nearly be killed by one of their closest teammates and friends. After yet another brush with death, the ending has now begun. Following a short period of time, a mysterious transfer student arrives at Gekkoukan. His name is Ryoji Mochizuki, and as it turns out, he is much more important than he lets on. Though, this is partially due to the fact that he himself does not remember his past. He becomes close friends with Junpei, as well as spending time with Makoto, feeling a sort of bond with him. The sole opposition to him is Aigis, who warns everyone that he is a threat after first setting eyes on him. This is brushed off as nothing more than her being overly cautious, considering Ryoji's flirtatious nature. Though, it turns out that Aigis' instincts were spot on. Ryoji is not a typical student. He is the 13th shadow. Manifesting after the defeat of the other 12 shadows and the sounding of the bell, Ryoji is the final piece of the puzzle that leads to Nyx's arrival. The Appraiser. Ryoji's role is to act as the vessel for the return of Nyx. During a confrontation 10 years ago, Aigis fought Ryoji in his true form and was unable to defeat him. Seeing no other option, she sealed him within a nearby boy. This boy was a young Makoto who, during this battle, lost his parents. From that point forward, Ryoji laid dormant within him, until his arrival at Iwatadai Dorm, where he awakens and takes form as Pharos. Ryoji and Makoto had been bound by fate ever since that day. All of these pieces falling into place, Ryoji gives Seize an ultimatum. If Makoto is to kill him, then they will lose all of their memories involving the Dark Hour, allowing them to die peacefully and unaware when Nyx arrives. However, if they do not, then, as Ryoji says, they will suffer more than they could possibly imagine. Due to the time spent within Makoto, Ryoji grew a more emotional and human side to him. This is why he made his offer, as he does not want to see people suffer needlessly. He leaves Makoto and the others to ruminate on his offer, giving them exactly 1 month. Ryoji's arrival and offer act as the penultimate confrontation with death for Makoto as well as the rest of the team. From this point forward, they can no longer sit on their knowledge of death. It is coming for them all, and they must make a decision. Approaching the final steps of Persona 3's journey, it's now time to take a look at the last aspect of death: acceptance. Finding the strength to live while understanding that death is inevitable. Throughout the story, various characters will experience a change within them. This change is represented visually and through gameplay by having the character's persona evolve. Transforming into a stronger form, this change occurs during critical moments during each character's story. This happens at not just any crucial moment, but the moment in which this character has finally accepted death. Earlier, I mentioned the impact Shinji's death had on both Ken and Akihiko, and this is demonstrated through specific scenes where they lament on the past and death. Akihiko's persona evolves as he visits the vigil for Shinji, marking a change in his understanding of the world and himself. He admits that he was wrong, and that strength alone is not enough to change the world. Ken's evolves after a conversation with Akihiko, where the latter remarks that the dead will never come back. Ken acknowledges that he was just running away from the loneliness that had haunted him. Both of them finish their monologue by remembering Shinji, symbolizing their acceptance, the acceptance of his death, as well as the possibility of theirs. The others also experience these evolutions in their own poignant scenes, connected by the theme of death. By accepting their mortality, and the mortality of others, each character is able to finish their mental journey, beginning the story as victims of trauma and burden, now ending it as stronger and more confident individuals. Moving back to the ultimatum delivered by Ryoji, this is the point of the story where death is the most present. The looming threat of everyone dying with no chance to stop it. During the weeks following, players will see the mental state of each of the characters slowly wear down. At first, everyone just goes about their business silently, making passing remarks upon Makoto's return to the dorm, asking questions about the afterlife, and wondering if it's normal to be as afraid as they are. Speaking to anyone in the dorm leads to a solemn chat with few words, truly capturing this sense of dread and discomfort. The feeling of defeat permeates Iwatadai dorm. After a week, everyone meets in the lounge to discuss what the plans are moving forward. This leads to an excellent moment from Junpei as he breaks down, snapping at Yukari, revealing his feelings, admitting that, yeah, he's afraid, and that being afraid shouldn't be looked down upon. And he is right. Being afraid of your impending death is not something that's easy to stomach. Side note here, I just want to go out on a limb and say that I don't believe this goes back on his acceptance of death during Chidori's death. I kind of see this as a natural response to knowing that in spite of everything that everyone had fought for, they're collectively doomed. Not only will he die, but everyone in the world, and he has a hard time accepting that. Anyways, in this same moment of weakness, we learn the faintest amount about Junpei's home life, where he lets out that his father is an alcoholic who treats him badly. This giving more clarity to why he acts the way he does, always trying to alleviate tension and stand out as the funny guy. Following this meeting, leading up to the end of December, each character goes over their feelings and finds the resolve to take a stand against Nyx, choosing not to kill Ryoji, offering him mercy, as well as standing their ground against impossible odds. Makoto and the others decide that it is better to fight and lose, rather than to die not even having tried, symbolically marking their acceptance of death and will to live. This thought process can be applied to real life outside of the fantastical setting of Persona 3. In spite of the fact that we all die, it's better to have lived than to have never lived at all. Hiding oneself in fear, never experiencing any of the beauty that the world and life has to offer. Interestingly, one member believes that they should take Ryoji's offer of mercy. Aigis. She pleads with Makoto to take Ryoji's deal, sparing everyone the pain that they're going to experience. This serves the plot by creating tension and drama, but also by acting as the final step in Aigis' journey to become more human. She doesn't comprehend why they would accept their impending doom due to her inorganic nature. Being a robot, she acts with logic first, emotion second. Remembering her purpose in life to protect humans, she sees Ryoji's deal as the most logical outcome for everyone she has grown to care for, claiming that they would just be throwing their lives away otherwise. Despite Aigis' pleas, no one backs down from their decision. Instead, they help her through her feelings. First Junpei, and then the others, explain that she doesn't need to have one singular purpose in life. In spite of being a robot, she has feelings and is able to think for herself. She may be functionally immortal, but she's still alive, and she can decide the purpose of her life on her own. Now standing with them, Aigis has developed the determination to help her friends fight Nyx. In accepting their battle, Makoto declines Ryoji's offer. Understanding that this final battle may lead to tragedy, he stands his ground. By rejecting his offer, Makoto grants kindness and mercy to Ryoji. Sparing the embodiment of death demonstrates his inner strength and compassion. Even if Ryoji would return to become the avatar for Nyx, there is kindness in Makoto's decision. It takes a lot of bravery to stare death directly in the face and proclaim that you're going to fight. After this, everyone readies themselves for their final confrontation, climbing Tartarus to battle Nyx and save humanity from simultaneous death. Standing in their way are the final members of Strega, Jin and Takaya. In a sense, both Strega and Seize were victims in the grand plan. Despite facing off, both sides have been taken advantage of. Both were manipulated by someone in power, only to be cast aside. Strega with the Kirijo group, and Seize with Ikitsuki. However, the difference between the two is in how they cope with this. Seize used the experience to strengthen their bonds and find even more value in the time they have. Strega instead grew cold and resentful of the world that would do this to them, denying themselves a chance to ever live a proper life. Eventually, leading them to form a cult around the revival of Nyx. Viewing Nyx's arrival as the ultimate form of revenge, Strega tried to rally the masses behind their twisted views. During their final confrontation, Takaya laments that the world is paradoxical. Mankind cannot live until it finds a meaning to live for. But there is no meaning left for this world. Mankind is doomed to live while suffering, so the death that Nyx brings serves as the ultimate victory. A release from the cruel paradox of life. And while his understanding of the world can be explained due to his circumstances, a boy who was abused and robbed of his chance at a normal life, this is not how mankind should proceed. There is no singular correct answer for the meaning of life. This is something that Nyx even reasserts after Makoto's sacrifice, but we'll get to that in just a minute. At last, the final battle between Makoto and Nyx has come. The physical incarnation of death stands tall, boasting a form that is truly haunting. Nyx towers over Makoto and the others, wearing a twisted version of Ryoji's face like a mask. With an eerie smile, Nyx speaks out against their rebellion, stating that it is futile to resist the fall, while still admiring their resolve to fight. Throughout the battle, Nyx cycles through the arcana while delivering quotes that add more weight to the themes seen in the game. These remarks show us that despite Nyx being death itself, it still values life, believing that life is to be celebrated and respected, showing that the cast has come full circle on their journey, as well as the fact that they're able to hold their ground against this formidable foe. Even if they are afraid, they have made their choice to fight and are sticking to it. Upon reaching the last arcana, death, the journey is now complete. Each of these statements by Nyx form a timeline, which is similar to how the arcana function in real life. The purpose of the tarot is to analyze the path of one's life, with each card encompassing a different aspect a person can have. When pulling a certain card, someone who is performing a tarot reading is able to explain at what stage someone may be at in their life. Looking a bit closer at the phrase, the arcana is the means by which all is revealed, we can see that Nyx stands as the final step of the journey. Tarot cards are meant to represent the steps of a person's life. Each of the previous arcana were represented through Persona 3 by both the full moon shadows and the people you meet. The Fool is the card associated with Makoto, which was a masterful decision by Atlas. The Fool is associated with new beginnings and a blank slate, both of which are seen in the beginning of the game, as Makoto begins a new life at a new school. Acting as the new kid in town, everything is unfamiliar to him. Also associated with the Fool is unlimited potential. Due to the Fool being at the beginning of a journey, anything is possible and within reach. Through this lens, Makoto's journey gains another layer of depth. Starting the game as a somewhat apathetic individual, He goes on to change the lives of those around him and save humanity from extinction. The Fool is the first card of the major arcana, with Death being the 13th. The Death Tarot represents rebirth and the end of a journey. By facing Nyx, Makoto is facing the final steps in his story. Nyx unveils its strongest attacks upon the cast, sending them back. Helpless and unable to fight, they are weighed down. Sinking into the ground, everyone begins to panic. Shifting the focus to the real world, players see the various characters they encountered throughout the game, once again reminding players of the life they lived. During this scene, Natsuki can be seen thinking about Fuka and hoping that she is okay somewhere. The perspective switches back to Makoto as he awakens to a new power, something that Igor remarks is unlike anything he has ever seen before. This power is to wield the Universe Arcana. He is only able to do this due to the combined faith in him, the impact he had on everyone down on Earth. During this moment, any of the social links players have completed will share their thoughts of Makoto, hoping that he is safe, hoping that he is doing the best that he can. Ironically, not knowing that, simultaneously due to their faith, he will spare them all from the fall. Narratively speaking, this moment is wonderful, capitalizing on the emotions players will have felt as they bonded with the various social links. Now seeing them during this final battle creates a touching scene. It also serves the grander theme of death, and an aspect of Persona 3 that the developers were hoping to demonstrate. The idea that even in death, nobody truly goes away. You will live on through the memories of those you've affected. Makoto may sacrifice himself in the end, but he will live on through everyone he has touched. In remembering the time spent with others, it makes the weight of loss a little less heavy. It makes death easier to accept. No matter how insignificant someone may think they are, they'll be remembered. In the end, Makoto uses this newfound power to confront the true form of Nyx. During this battle, he is unable to attack the imposing foe. That is, until he activates the Great Seal, a move that cost him his life. Makoto sacrifices himself to seal Nyx, returning the primordial being to the state it was originally. This sacrifice preserved the lives of those whose time hadn't run up yet, while bringing his life full circle. The boy who was meant to die 10 years ago has met his fate. Following Makoto's sacrifice, we see the cast wondering where he had went. With Fuka unable to sense his life, everyone begins to panic. Amidst the confusion, a familiar voice speaks out, telling that the battle has been won, and things will return to the way they once were. Not just this, but also the added revelation that Makoto has found the answer to life's greatest question, something that they will all do one day. Makoto had just discovered it sooner than the rest. The voice adds on that Aigis too will find this answer. This segment of the story may seem cryptic at first glance, but reading a bit deeper will make it clear. The journey of Persona 3 saw Makoto grow as a person and proceed through each of the steps I mentioned earlier, acknowledging, confronting, and finally accepting death. In the end, Makoto not only accepted his death, but discovered his reason for living. This is what the disembodied voice, who we can assume to be either Ryoji or Nyx, tells us. He was able to uncover the meaning of his life, something that everyone will do one day. And what was the meaning of his life? It's simple. Makoto lived his life for the sake of others, as mentioned previously. He brought together countless people and changed the lives of those around him. Whether that be the central group of Cs, the various social links, or the wider world through his actions during the dark hour, Makoto found the resolve to sacrifice his life to preserve the world. The game takes this martyrdom a step further, by having Makoto's final persona be Messiah. Some may attribute this figure to Jesus, but his persona is meant to be a representation of the wider idea of a Messiah, someone who will lead the world to a better place, willing to sacrifice themselves for it, specifically during times of trouble or impending doom. Persona 3 tells its players that there is no singular meaning to life. It's something we must define for ourselves. Adding on to the arc players saw Aigis go through, Nyx tells her that she'll be able to find her meaning too. further developing the notion that she has become closer to a human, or rather, that she is alive. Aigis may have been created with one purpose in mind, but she has moved past that. Growing past the notion that she is a simple machine, Aigis can live for herself and set out on a path to discover what she would like to live for. After the dust has settled, life has returned to normal. The world has been saved and everyone involved with the Dark Hour has forgotten what transpired. The calendar skips forward to the month of March. Spring is on its way, with brighter skies and the cherry blossom trees blooming. On the morning of March 5th, Aigis approaches Makoto about the promise they made. The two of them meet at the promised spot on the roof, overlooking the city below. As petals fall, Makoto lies in Aigis' lap. Feeling weary from fatigue, he finds himself unable to move. The battle with Nyx sealed his fate, but allowed him to live out these final days with the ones he loved. Now alone, the two share one final moment together. During this solemn moment, Aigis reflects on the meaning of life, how one can only live if they accept that they will die. In finding that acceptance, one can find what they want to do in life. By accepting death, one can determine how to live and what their personal meaning is. And not just this, but your meaning in life doesn't need to be anything grand or complicated. Something as simple as protecting the ones you love is enough. In these final moments, Persona 3 fulfills the promise it made at the beginning of the story. Makoto's contract has been seen through. He was given the time to prevent the fall, and now, it is his time. As his life fades, the remaining members make their way to the roof to meet up. And then, the credits roll. This final scene plays in perfect harmony with Persona 3's thesis, remember, you will die. By showcasing the life of Makoto, allowing players to take control of his life, Persona 3 tells a beautiful story about overcoming the fear of death, accepting that one day, you will die. And instead of letting this control your life, making you live in fear, you have the ability to grow and learn. Showing the stories of various characters who have been touched by death and how they all develop over time. Creating what I consider to be a deeply profound story about death, as well as life. If you've made it to the end of the video, as always, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed my thoughts and analysis of Persona 3. If you could hit the like button and leave a comment with any feedback, then I'd greatly appreciate it. I have more stuff in the works, so stay tuned until next time. Maybe even subscribe and do all that fancy stuff if you haven't already. Once again, thank you guys for watching.